legislate something and give it time for it to evolve. Otherwise, if you come back to what I'm saying, you'll be creating barriers instead of removing barriers. In terms of the innovation ecosystem, the way I see it, and I was very involved in the DLP project, and one of the key things we are doing deliberately is that in any big project, we want to create some center of excellence. And in working in these projects, we believe the centers of excellence that we can get in this country are within the university domain. And that's why you'll find ourselves trying to work as closely as possible with the universities. That's not to mean that it's only universities where innovation can come from, but actually statistics and research has shown that a country which has many, which produces many academic research papers actually has a better base for innovation. Now we want to start entrenching that. But that does not mean we will work with people like iHub, NILAB, and many other innovation hubs. And every Thursday actually I have an open door policy where I meet a number of different people who will be trying to sit down with government and give their ideas and see how we can link them with people. So it's an ecosystem which is going to evolve, but as I've said, I don't want to have very hard and strong positions that for us to innovate we need to take this route. At times innovation is by accident, so how do we treat those accidents? Yes, we are going to have a national innovation policy, and I think that Nakosti has already done that, but we also need to perforate it a bit to allow some flexibility. But in terms of how do we link up the different projects, I think as a policy, government is looking at every time we have a big project, whether it's SGR, whether it's a big road, we are going to anchor an institution of higher learning into that project to create capacities, both at operational level, at a strategic level, and as well as looking ahead, because things change with time, and we need to embed them somewhere. So I hope really I got your question. On the question of operators, that's a question I was asked by operators. Unfortunately, I didn't give them an answer because I didn't have any. And I encourage startups and people in the applications development and solutions development not to take a hard position of telling operators, stick to your lane, and we stick to our lane. You need each other, and what we need is a debate. We need to see, and the model which works in India is not necessarily the model which is going to work here. The model which works in the USA is not necessarily the model which will work here. Because some of the operators there have reserves, so they can be able to continuously improve the networks on demand. Some of the operators here could be also able to do that. I'll give you an analogy in the road sector. In the transport sector, you have high tonnage vehicles, which requires roads which can be built to sustain trucks of 12 tons. And I think the head of state gave an example when I didn't know he comes from a place called Ishiara or something like that. And he said, why do you want to build a 12-ton road in a place like that? That means even in that sector, yes, the road is used by everybody, but you also have to look at heavy-duty roads and low-volume roads. Similarly, I think, and I don't yet have a model in place or some proper thinking in place. I think we also need to accommodate each other and discuss. And say, for example, if I'm doing a link to a university where I know this university will use certain, will go to certain sites more than others, maybe I need to optimize the bringing a server there. And if the operator does not have that knowledge, the startup or the business can sit down with them and educate them on that, so that they meet in somewhere. But if we start saying, stick to your lane, stick to my lane, the operators come talk to us, they go, the developers come and talk to us, they go. You know, we don't have the power to actually force either to do anything. The best is to bring them together and let them have a debate, and based on that debate, we'll get a solution. Thank you.
Thank you, Victor. Any more comment? Yeah.
Yes, thank you for those questions. So how do we bring people together from the different sectors? I think it's exactly this kind of forums and others that is referred to have more thematic discussions also on these issues. that are extremely important in order to move forward. When we talk about moving forward, I think within the Kenyan context, one shouldn't forget that there is an ICT master plan. And I think this ICT master plan provides also thematic areas under which ICT move forward. And I think there must be much better ownership of different stakeholders in terms of this master plan that already sets some priority areas forward in terms of ICTs and its application within the Kenyan context. So I think engaging a little bit more the different stakeholders in terms of this. I know the government made a big effort in consultation in terms of this master plan, but there should be ownership also of the different stakeholders to get on board in terms of what is being foreseen. How do we, this master plan, I think also if it's an end-to-end master plan, that is also for the stakeholders also to get in and to get involved. When we also look at pulling the different stakeholders together so that there is interest in terms of ICTs, I think digital literacy throughout is extremely important. And when we talk about digital literacy, it is of course within our universities, as has been mentioned earlier, but our civil servants and others must understand what is at stake when we talk about ICTs. And for UNESCO, it is very important that when we talk about this digital literacy, we only just talk about technology, but also some of the softer skills that are involved in looking at plagiarism, in looking at innovation and other elements where technology can play a role. I stop. Thank you.
Thanks, Jacob. Alice?
Thank you. I just wanted to speak to the issue of bringing in new stakeholders, which I think for me has been one of the most frustrating, not just for Kictanet, but I think for governments and for those of us working in the technology area, including the Internet Society, and those who actually develop protocols for the Internet. I think it's the lack of understanding of how important the Internet is, or ICTs is, to the kind of work that they do. And I think that's why there's quite a lot of work for organizations like UNESCO and others who are working towards implementing the so-called SDGs and linking those to the broader technological space to ensure that there's a certain level of understanding. For example, one of the examples that we keep giving, I think 2 weeks ago at the GSMA to the mobile stakeholders was anything that happens to the internet or any challenges that happen to the internet are challenges to the mobile sector. And so the mobile sector really does need to take the internet quite seriously. And I think that is what is going to happen to the other sectors as well. Anything that happens or the challenges that we see at with the internet and with ICTs are challenges to the other sectors as well. When you look at, for example, health, the issues to do with privacy, data protection, security. When you look at the areas of finance, the same issues come there. And so I think it's understanding where that is coming from. So here the issue of digital literacy, I think, goes beyond just understanding how to use technology, but also understanding what it means to our daily life.
Thanks, Alice. For me, what I want to make one comment just add to what Alice has said. Use stakeholders. We are slowly seeing some of these groups trickling in. I was introduced to a lady who's now involved in a group called Hacker Lawyers, or Lawyer Hackers, or something like that. What these lawyers are doing globally is coming together with technologists, policymakers, and trying to find creative ways of engaging with government and other stakeholders to ensure that laws and regulation are now in line with the fast in technology world. I'm reminded the discussion we are currently having in this country about blockchain. And I don't want to steal the thunder, but because we're going to discuss that in detail. So increasingly we are starting to see more and more people starting to engage in internet governance, which is really a good thing. Thank you very much, members of this panel. Victor, we really appreciate your time, and the rest of it. I would now like to invite Mr. Dr.in-waiting John Walubengo to come in and introduce his panel. Walu, over to you.
Hello. There we go. Thank you, Ali. I hope my supervisors will make me a doctor soon, otherwise things might backfire. My name is John Walubengo. I'm a lecturer at Multimedia University. I'm going to take you through this second session, taking stock. And I would like to invite my panelists, starting with Eric Osiakwan. Eric, I hope you are around. Great. All the way from Ghana. Eric, please have a seat on the far left. Alice Munyua, if she can come back. You can sit next to Eric. And Dr. Waudo Siganga. Just have a seat next to Alice. I'm afraid we've lost Victor Chalu, who will also have joined us on stage, but I think we still have, welcome, Dr. I'm sure we'll do justice to this session, which talks about internet governance in Kenya, and a look at the past and at the future. Just for those joining us late, I would like to, I think also because two of the panelists were not introduced, I would like to start by introducing Eric Osiakwan on the far left. I met Eric almost, 10 years ago, somewhere in Mombasa. At that time, we were agitating for the construction of the submarine cables, the TIMS project. Before the submarine cables came to being, we used as East Africa to connect to the internet through very slow and expensive satellite connections. And Eric was involved in the early teams that were agitating for something called open access, you know. There are submarine cables, for example, in West Africa, which were not adding value in terms of making connectivity affordable. So for the East African coast, there was a new model that was being proposed, and Eric was quite involved in that one. He's also a World Bank consultant, and he's been involved in setting up IXPs across Africa. Perhaps most recently, Eric became an investor, an angel investor. Maybe he'll tell us what the angel aspect means. Next to him, we have Alice. Alice had already been introduced, but I'll just wrap up and say she's currently working for the African Union Commission. She is a internet founder, trustee, and has sat on very many boards. I'll just list some of them. Like CCK, where she served for 6 years, KNIC, about 3 years. She sat on the ICANN board as well, and currently sits on the ISOC board. So she has a wealth of information or experience that we'll perhaps want to pick from. I also met Alice a long time ago, I think 2004. She was involved in agitating for the first national ICT policy in Kenya. I know most of you I don't know if they're Generation X, may not know that just 15 years ago you could not discuss policy outside government. So those days were quite tough, but I'm glad that through her efforts we managed to have our first ICT policy 2006. Next to me is Dr. Walubengo. He's the chair of Computer Society of Kenya and a member of the World Information Technology and Services. Walubengo was, I think, the first Kenyan to sit on the global IGF mark, so with Katundu from CCK. So Dr. Siganga has seen IGF from a global perspective because the multi-stakeholder advisory group is sort of the board that drives the whole IGF agenda. And I think with that, with those introductions, I would quickly want to go into the discussion, starting with Eric. I'll just give them 5 minutes or so to give us the experiences on what they think about the IGF at a global level, the past, present, and the future, and perhaps what it means for us at a local level. Eric.
Okay, thank you very much. And thanks for inviting me. I consider myself Kenya's second home. So it's great to be back here. Thanks for the kind words, John. It's interesting to see there's been 10 years already. But sort of when we started, and it looks like we are agitators, right? Started agitating for something. And today we can see that we've made progress in terms of connectivity, in terms of multi-stakeholder, in terms of building our connection to the global world and being part of what is happening worldwide. When you invited me, when Barack, who is not Obama, invited me, thanks Barack, one of the things that I sort of spent the time thinking, would you say the same things you'd be saying, or can you say something new? And it was clear to me that I think we've had a major paradigm shift in Africa, which is a very important paradigm. So if we took the time when, before we got into, 2010, the second decade of the century, a lot of the issues were around connectivity, right? So how do we get connected to the internet? How do we participate? How do we become part of ICANN? How do we become part of IGO? So it was more of access, right? And access in that sense was how do we get to the table? How do we become part of the conversation? And I think that in this second decade, we have moved from that to now being at the table. So what does, for example, access mean? All right, so in my view, our discussion about access should be around our contribution to the global common good. In other words, we have moved from the consumption of technology to the production of technology. So today we have a lot of entrepreneurs who see themselves as, I can create the next Facebook, I can create the next Google. We all know mobile money came from Kenya. We've seen innovations in Shahidi and for Union. And we can go on and on. We've seen them in Ghana, we've seen them in South Africa, we've seen them all over Africa. Right? And if you take the global economy and you talk about competitiveness, it's about your contribution to the production side of the equation, not the consumption side. So how do we define the issues on the production side where we are now? So if you take access, I want to define access now as how do startups or the production of apps or technology or design from Africa get access to the global market? Right? What does that mean in terms of internet governance? How do we make sure that somebody who is entrepreneurial in Africa or from Kenya is able to get access to the global resources similar to somebody who is starting in Silicon Valley, right? Or is starting in India, or is starting somewhere in Europe. Right? So when we talk about access, that's what I want to think. I I want to sort of frame the conversation. So I've sort of the past, the present, sort of, this is what the future is. One of the things we also talked about then was affordability. And when we talked about affordability then, it was more, hey, how is this internet going to be cheaper for everyone so that more people can get online? Right. Today I want to talk about affordability in the sense of how is it easier for somebody, how is it more affordable to start a company? Or how affordable is it for an African entrepreneur to participate in the global space? So from a stakeholder perspective, how does the private sector, government, civil society, legislators make sure that we can create an environment for our entrepreneurs, digital natives or millennials, to be able to participate and have affordable access to the global market? The third thing, the other thing that we talked about then was around accessibility. Oh, I think I talked about accessibility already. But the third thing we talked about was sort of just making sure that there was broadband, and broadband was available more pervasively. So now if we're going to talk about broadband, it's more around how do we get broadband into remote parts of Kenya, for example, or remote parts of Africa. So how do we make it accessible in Kisumu? How does somebody in Kisumu able to get the same speed? So it's not that, we got to move from the question of, oh, okay, it's all in the urban, it's in Kenya, Mombasa, but now how do we make sure that it's in Finland now, we want to make it a right, broadband is a right? So anybody, any part of Finland has a right to broadband. It has implications for cost, and etc., etc. But for me, the future is stretching our imagination to that level.
Thanks, Eric, for your opening remarks. Talked about innovation access of our local innovations to the global community. Says the affordability has changed from 10 years ago. Today we talk of how do we make it affordable for our startups to get into the economic space, and how do we provide broadband on a universal basis. Later on, I'll ask you to give us the answers to your questions. For now, I want to invite Alice also to give us her opening remarks regarding IGM from a global perspective and what it means for us in Kenya. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Well, to begin with, for me, it's a question that the term internet governance, we like to call it a very slippery term because it means different things to different people. For Eric here, I think he's talked about infrastructure, access, and all of those areas. For me, where I'm coming from, actually, it's the politics at the global, at the national, regional, and global level. And that's where I want to come from in terms of actually where did internet governance come from? And as we all know, and again, when we talk about ICTs, are we talking about just the internet, or what's the definition now? It's a question perhaps I would like us to discuss later. So I don't know how many of you know where the internet came from. It was a project of the US defense until it then became much more open to the private sector, and from there we saw organizations coming up that began to make commercial value out of the internet. And the first ones were obviously the domain name system, where people began to sell domain names and make quite a lot of money. And so it's from there that the issues, the political issues started coming up. But then just, again, to go back a little bit, remember that once the US defense then handed the internet to the private sector, I think in 1986, where the Internet Engineering Task Force was established, we have to remember that there was no central government, there was no central planning, there was no brand design. It just expanded around the world with people making use of it in whatever way they could. And that's why we call it a permissionless space where innovation grows, and so you see all sorts of applications and systems coming up, from the OTTs to all the other great, including the World Wide Web that we use today, and the domain name system that was created as a database by the Internet Engineering Task Force. So it having grown that rapidly, one of the most successful one was obviously the domain name system, which is managed by the Internet Corporation for saying names and numbers. And unfortunately, because the US government then decided, or rather still had oversight, and this has nothing to do with the fact that the US government wanted to hold on to the so-called internet. It's because of legacy issues. The internet grew, was developed in the US, and so by extension, the US government had to provide oversight to ensure that important public policy issues were being taken care of, or were being monitored, and oversight was being provided. And so it's because of this, and the notion that there's the notion then that the US government is the only controls the internet. And because of that, during the World Summit on the Information Society, a lot of the discussions around internet governance was around who controls the internet. Really, no one controls the internet, not one government, not one organization, not even one individual. It's an open, ubiquitous technology that anyone can get into, anyone can use. But there was that notion during that time, during the World Summit, that it was the icon. The internet, IGF came out of that space of really tense diplomatic discussions around who controls the internet. And actually Kenya led the ITU working group and chaired that working group on internet governance. And I remember being invited to be part of that working group as civil society then, but then being invited to be part of the government delegation because we provided a certain level of expertise that our government delegation did not have. Just by the fact that I think, as Walu said earlier, we were not even allowed to talk about the internet. In fact, it was illegal then to access the internet at that point, or to even send email. It was illegal. You asked Mucheru and Waudo here, will be able to tell us. So we've come a long way, and I think perhaps that tells how old we are. But then it's really come a long way from that. So. We've come to a point where now there's a certain level of understanding that yes, ICANN is very, very important because domain names bring in quite a lot of money. And I think that is now where I want us to focus on that. Yes, ICANN is an important organization in the so-called internet ecosystem, but there are so many others that we are ignoring as we discuss internet governance. Internet governance is not just about the Internet Corporation for signing in numbers. There's the Internet Society that is the home for the Internet Engineering Task Force. The Internet Engineering Task Force develops protocols that are extremely important, and one of them is that domain name system that then is managed by ICANN. They develop encryption protocols. For example, when you look at your WhatsApp, it's encrypted now. Those are the guys that actually sit in their t-shirts and slippers in different parts of the world and develop those protocols that we use. Unfortunately, we are not involved in that space, and I see a number of my ISOC colleagues here, and I think that's the space we need to get involved with, especially because I tend to believe we have achieved quite a lot in terms of access, in terms of infrastructure. We still have a long way to go because it's still quite expensive to access. But when I tell my colleagues that I have fiber to my house, and it's faster than when I go to their own countries like the US, they can't believe the fact that I come from Nairobi and I have better internet connectivity, and that can use my mobile phone to make all sorts of, to make my life easier. But while we have that, we're not involved in developing the internet we want. And I think I want to take us back to that discussion we had earlier, in that we are going to be the ones that come up with the next billion of users of the internet. And so we have to be part of that discussion in terms of what kind of internet we want. Now, yes, we have access, yes, we have digital literacy, but we have to determine what we want the internet to do for us as we move forward. And I think that is the internet governance, is the IG discussion we need to have going forward. And I still believe we don't need to be dictated by what's going on at the global level. It's actually very important to understand our own context. We're unique as Kenyans, and I think that's one of the questions that is asked everywhere. Why is it M-Pesa is only successful in Kenya but not anywhere else? And it's a question that is asked at every space, even at the GSMA, because it hasn't been as successful, which means we're unique in a certain sort of way. And so we may want to start asking ourselves, what kind of internet do we want? So what does that mean for our internet governance discussions going forward, so that we're not being dictated by what's happening at the global level? While it's important, but we may want to create our own and begin to influence what the global level discusses around internet governance. Thank you.
Okay, thanks a lot, Alice, for those opening remarks, taking us through the history of internet and how the rest of the world imagined that the US was controlling the internet because it was created in the US, and the internet governance discourse started by asking, why should only one country control these resources? Secondly, what I picked from her is that we've come a long way. Currently, there are African voices at the internet governance space, but still there's very little African input at the technical level. This as the ISOC board member, we have something called the Internet Engineering Task Force. These are the engineers or the techies who develop protocols. That perhaps could be our next frontier. Do we have the African voice in that space, fronting for the engineering requirements that are contextualized for the African environment? I want now to invite Dr. Wawudo also to give us his input, particularly because you are one of the first members from Africa to sit on the advisory group for Internet Governance Forum. Welcome, Dr.
Thank you, John Walubengo. It's a big honor for me to be on the panel here with accomplished colleagues like Osiakwan and Alice. I would also like to thank and pay homage to the organizers of this event for making it such a big success. As you can see, the turnout is quite good, and they've done a good job in sustaining it over the years. The early meetings of the Kenya IGF that I attended, I think the crowd was very small. I was just mentioning to somebody that I was coming in, I was expecting to see so many familiar faces, but it took me quite a period of time. That area where there's the T, I passed through there and I saw a lot of people and I didn't recognize anybody. I came in here and it took me a few minutes before I recognized somebody. That was Ali, and then later on I started noticing people like Alice. So that means the IGF is growing. You know, in the initial stages of the IGF, I was a little bit apprehensive whether this idea would really catch up, for a couple of reasons. First of all, the IGF was set up on the basis of what some people call a talk show. That means it's a meeting where people discuss things, but whatever they discuss, they cannot come up with any resolutions that can be implemented by anybody. So it's just a place to discuss. So based on that premise, I was not sure that it was really going to work, because most people like to go to a place and discuss, come up with resolutions and see that those resolutions are having some effect outside by being implemented either by some government agencies or by some other agencies. So it was a big surprise for me. When the IGF was set up in 2006, the first meeting was set for Athens, and I attended that meeting just as a matter of mainly some to check what was happening there. And I was very surprised at the turnout. It was very big for an event that would be billed as a talk show. So that's the first thing that I can say. The second thing that I noticed about the IGF, or that would make me apprehensive, was we were worried about the uptake of governments in this process. Because as some of my colleagues have said, the setup of the IGF came out of actually a very contentious process. Initially, in 1998, there was a big meeting of the ITU somewhere in the US, I think in Minneapolis, and in that meeting, they decided that they wanted to have a process whereby they could discuss how ICTs could be incorporated into what was then known as the Millennium Development Goals, how ICTs could contribute. So that proposal was made by Tunisia, by the Tunisian delegation. And it was agreed to set up that process and work towards a summit that was going to be held in around 5 years, that is in 2005, so as to discuss whatever things would have been discussed in the time in between. And that process was known as the World Summit on Information Society. Now, during that process, this issue of internet governance became one of the key issues. So key that it was decided to form a committee on its own within that process to discuss internet governance. And just to tell you the truth, actually, the target was this organization known as ICANN, that Alice has referred to, the Internet Corporation for Assigned Names and Numbers. Because what had happened was that the internet had evolved in such a way that it reached a level where there was no government control over it. The way we had known telecommunications to be controlled by government agencies, particularly the ITU, the International Telecommunications Union. For example, telephony was controlled by ITU, so was radio, broadcasting, and so on. They were all controlled by ITU and ITU affiliates in the different countries. So internet had grown outside that. So there was a feeling that internet needed to be brought into the ambit of the ITU. And that argument started that discussion on internet governance within the WISIs. And as Alice said, that committee was actually chaired by a Kenyan. And the Kenyan was actually quite a strong guy because he kept asking these people from the US, how come top-level domains like MIL, which stands for military, like EDU, which is for education, how come they're not available to us? How come you have just reserved them for people from the US? So there were a lot of discussions there which really shook the ground. And out of those discussions, when we went for the WISIS itself in Tunisia. In fact, before that, the discussions were so hot that the UN Secretary General decided to set up a committee or a working group known as the Working Group on Internet Governance, which I had the privilege to be a member of. Also, Katundu, who was working for the CCK at the time, was a member of. And we came up with some proposals about how we want the internet to be governed in future. And on that committee, sorry about that. On that committee, there were some governments that were very, very vocal, including some African governments. They wanted ITU to take over the running of the internet because they said most people in the world are not participating in the governing of the internet. It is governed by people from one country. So there was a lot of discussion. And then this idea of multi-stakeholder came up. And I remember during our meetings there were arguments where people said that from developing countries, it is the governments that represent the people. They represent everybody because they have been voted for by the people. So we had all those arguments and people didn't want this multi-stakeholder thing. And then we came up with some proposals, some models of how we wanted internet governance to be governed. There were some from South Africa, they came up with a proposal to hand over to ITU and so on and so forth. This one of IGF was just a side thing that somebody came up with in one of our meetings. We were taken to a cottage somewhere in Switzerland and told, unless you come up with a solution to this internet governance problem, we are locking you in this cottage and you will not come out. So somebody came up, I think it was the chair at that time, he's called Nitin Shah from India. He came up with an idea of an IGF which is just an overarching body that discusses internet issues. Because one of the things that people were complaining about was that there was no place to discuss, just to discuss internet issues. So it was one of the proposals, but not a main proposal. Now, when these people went to Tunisia, the governments discussed all those proposals, and there was a lot of contention. They agreed on nothing. And you know, the meeting was only 3 days. So by the third day, they had agreed on nothing. It wasn't like a football match. It has to come to an end. So at the last minute, somebody said, by the way, there was that small thing, IGF, where people just want to talk and they are not, the decisions mean nothing and nobody implements anything. Do we pass that one? Then everybody said, yeah, let's pass that one. So that one was passed. So that's the only thing that came out of Tunisia, IGF. And that's why I was apprehensive, because it was not a decision-making body, and the governments were not really much for it, so I was not expecting them to participate in it. But you can see, at the end of the day, many people have been attending the IGF meetings, both nationally, regionally, internationally. So that means it's a success, and the governments have been on board. You have seen our own government representatives here coming to participate. So, taking all that into account, the history and where we are at the moment, and the big crowd that we have here, Madam Chairman, I think I would say that the IGF is in a good state. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Sikanga, for giving us the inside view of how the IGF, if you want, was cooked. What I take from your input is really the clash between, the culture of ITU. ITU is sort of, it is government control. Each state has one vote. So there's a tradition of how decisions are made in terms of each country has one vote, and you meet at a place and you only listen to government. Vis-a-vis the internet environment, which I think Alice referred to, is permissionless, where anybody and everybody has a say, and more importantly, equal say. So these two cultures continue to clash, I would say, up to date. But slowly by slowly, we're beginning to see them converging. The fact that Victor was here as a government rep is a sort of a milestone. I know previously even Demo used to come, but it's not easy, because the way government is run, and for a good reason, is bureaucratic, top, bottom. The way internet runs is completely opposite, bottom up. So it is good that both sides are coming to a table and sharing ideas on how the internet should evolve or be governed. I would like to open it up now for questions. I notice we're running out of time. What we are now going to do is get a few questions to the panelists, maybe the first three. Then after that, I will ask the panelists to respond. If you have a question, open mic, you just stand up and queue on the mic. Introduce yourself and organization, and then choose a panelist to answer, or I'll choose for you. Just go ahead.
Thank you, Walubengo. My name is Keegan Koch. I'm from Telecom Kenya, an operator. So my question goes to Alice and Dr. Modo. Mine comes on that aspect of, as a continent, where do we stand when you're looking at the 7 arcades? Because the internet is governed by around 7 DNSs that should the internet be taken hostage, they can be manually reset. Now, I take that none of those 7 is located in this continent. Now, could we champion it that we do have it even more preferably in Kenya? So that now, as we're growing the bigger space, not only are we 800 million plus, but it's an opportunity to also light up our own internet and also address the issue of where would our developers and startup have a playing field. Now, now that comes to ICANN and everything around it. The second question will also be, why haven't we not yet gotten the .Africa GTLD? I know it's a big political space, and I followed it, and I still follow it now. So those 2 questions, and it's also open to you.
Okay, next.
Thank you. My name is Bob Ochieng from ICANN. I must say the first question, some of them have scared me, but I hope, Alice, you will come to rescue in some of those questions. Now, I think I'll have more of comments and maybe also a question to the panelists. First of all, I must say that I'm also very impressed, like Olga says, on this turnout. And in the previous session, something was mentioned about new audience, and I think we are not stressing this enough. Maybe we'd want to hear from the panelists what they think on how we can actually encourage this new audience, so that this discussion does not appear foreign, or it doesn't sound so distant to some of us. When Maodo says that it took him quite a bit of time to recognize most of the participants, I think that is very encouraging. It means that new people are coming in. But if you were to take stock of those of us in this room, how many are lawyers, for example? How many are from the hotel industry? Do these people use the internet? Do their businesses need the internet? If the answer to that question is yes, how can we bring them here? I think that's really fundamental. From where I stand, from an ICANN perspective, of course, we work in a multi-stakeholder model and it's bottom-up. But now, these stakeholders are the focus, and it has been quite a challenge bringing enough of them. Not even our telcos come here as they're supposed to do. I think just a few of them will try to come. So I think that's very critical for us, and if we can have further insights on that, would be helpful. I think lastly is on really a challenge to Alice and the pioneers, if I might call you so, on what do you think needs to be done to the young people so that they can actually take up this with a lot of interest. I'm imagining in another 10 years when you feel tired and you might not be very willing to participate or to be a panelist, who is going to take your shoe? What can we do to these people to actually mentor them and hold them to see this seriously?
Just a brief one, because I've seen people not asking the question. I am banning on the question.
Yeah, go for it.
My name is Harvey. What is the big data? We're talking stock. What is the big data? What is the data that you have? Because we're taking stock of where we come from 10 years. What is the big data? What is the participation level? What are the stakeholders? That's not coming out.
One more.
My name is Abdallah Omari from Kenya Network Information Center. I wish Victor was still here, but my suggestion, more like a question, if we would include IGF as a subject in schools, so that students can learn about governance issues in the internet, as we introduce the laptop programs, so that the young ones, as they grow up, they're able to grasp these issues. They don't have to have challenges like Gigi, Dr. Udo, and Alice to learn them by proxy, trying to capture things here and there. So let's put it as a culture, and I would have been happy if Victor was here, but I know the panel will take the message back. Thank you.
Okay, now just one more, because we want the panelists to respond. Please go ahead very quickly.
Hi, I'm Marilyn Vernon, representing CEPESA, Collaboration on International Policy for East and Southern Africa. And my question is in regards to inclusivity and forums such as the IGF. I know the mandate for the IGF was renewed, I'm not sure for how many years, but in regards to the local context from the panelist's point of view, how do you intend to shape or change the narrative so that outcomes from these discussions actually result in implementable actions? What would you like to see over the course of the next 5 to 10 years from these discussions? What would you like to see take place in these spaces? Thank you.
Okay, so panelists, what I'll do, somewhat direct to Alice, so I will allow her to start, and then later on each of you can beef up or add.
Thank you for those actually quite hard questions. Root servers, we have 13 of them in the world, and the L root is managed by the Internet Corporation for same names and numbers. The others are managed by organizations and individuals, and then this goes back to the legacy issues, historical legacy issues I was talking about, because most of them are based in the US, managed by engineers in the US. So the only one that we are able to actually have what we call AnyCast is the L route that is managed by ICANN, and we do have that in Kenya and in several other African countries. In terms of root service, I think it's an area that we actually need to have a little bit more understanding, and that's why my question was at the beginning was what kind of internet do we want, and is there anything we need to change from that perspective? And it's actually a difficult question because it's one of the most sensitive questions, politically sensitive question every time it comes up in any space, whether it's at the international space or at the ICANN space, in terms of who controls the root service. Why is it that they're all based in the Western, the Northern Hemisphere, and all we have for the rest of the developing world is Unicast. And perhaps we can provide more information as we go on. Dot Africa. Well, yes, Dot Africa. Yeah, I think it's because I've been the punching bag for Dot Africa and the spokesperson for Dot Africa, and mostly the punching bag for Dot Africa because of my role in the African Union Commission. Now, there's a way that ICANN works. Dot Africa is a geographic name. ICANN developed a guideline called the new GTLD guidebook that is very, very specific about how you go about applying and managing geographic names. And Africa is a geographic name that's protected by UNESCO, by the UN and specifically UNESCO. It's like Kenya or Spain. You just can't have Alice Munyua managing Kenya, for example. So for Dot Africa, African governments have to have given the go-ahead and endorsement for that name to be managed by either an organization or any person that was interested in buying. And you had to pay about what was it, $185,000 US dollars to apply for that domain name, but you still have to have support from the government authority. It's like .Nairobi. If somebody goes and applies for .Nairobi, you have to have endorsement and support from the Nairobi County, from the Kenya government, and from all the other relevant city council and all the relevant authorities, because before you can go and apply for that, and ICANN demands of that. So what happened, obviously, I think a lot of you know the history. So currently, it's embroiled in a court case in California. It's between the Internet Corporation for Assigned Names and Numbers and the .Connect Africa. And the African continent stands and waits as this organization based in California and an American citizen fights over a domain that belongs to a continent. Very annoying, very frustrating, politically, and a political hotcake. So you can understand where we are coming from. So we are still at that level, and we're waiting to see the outcomes of that. Now the African Union is very busy, trying to ensure that this never happens again by engaging in other, and that's exactly what I was talking about when, at the beginning when I said we really need to engage in these internet governance processes. We may not call it the internet governance processes, but they're global policy processes that actually have an impact on us, and we wake up when things have happened. And that is what happened, is that we woke up when around the time when we realized that the .Africa domain would have ended up with somebody that was not supported by the African continent. How it ended up on the new GTLD guidebook is also a question that we still ask, and that's why again it's politically sensitive, because when you look at the .eu, it's a CCTLD. It was applied for in a different way. When you look at .asia, they applied for .asia when the window for new GTLDs only allowed for about 20. This time around, it was open and we had 1,930 applications, and unfortunately .Africa ended up being one of them. So realizing that, that's why I think we've taken it upon ourselves. Back to that question around the youth. So I'm actually answering questions, across all spheres. Is realizing that we don't get engaged in these areas, and why I call myself youth, because if you look at the people who developed the protocols, especially ITF, and who developed WinSAP and the others, they could be my grandfathers, but they are still very active and still still continue to develop protocol. So what we did was to get involved in these areas and really understand them and begin to be the ones to influence policy. And that's why we're in these spaces. That's why I chair, for example, the Public Safety Working Group of the Governmental Advisory Committee that looks at how we develop public policy issues that affect our safety, from consumer protection to data protection to how we go about finding out who owns a domain name. Getting involved in, for example, the underserved regions working group that makes sure that the next round of new GTLDs really reviews what is happening at the moment, and one of the good case examples is North Africa, to ensure that it doesn't happen again, so that any new policy processes that come up take that into consideration. So I think that's how the youth can get involved. The question around providing IG as a course in schools, I think I'll go back to what I said at the beginning. The word internet governance is a very slippery, and there's no way you can. The Internet Governance Forum is a process. It's not regulation. It's not a policy. It's not a topic for discussion. The IGF is a forum that brings together people to talk about specific issues. There are schools all over the world, including at the Africa level, that call themselves the Africa Internet Governance Forum School, but what they focus around is, I think, how the internet ecosystem and the organizations that work in that internet ecosystem work, and then provide avenues that either young people or governments or others can get involved. So I think it will be very difficult to introduce IG into schools because there's really no agreed universal definition of what internet governance is. Perhaps the academics, Dr. Walubengo here needs to think about how that will come up. So it's more, what would be more important is identifying issues, internet governance issues that are important to us, and perhaps teaching those. For example, cybersecurity. How do we deal with cybersecurity? What does that mean? And one of the questions that annoys techies so much is when governments, people from the private sector talk about cybersecurity. I'm always being asked, what do you mean by cybersecurity? Do you mean routing? Do you mean the domain name? Do you mean IP? Internet protocol is, where are you coming from when you talk about cybersecurity? So involving youth would be involving them in some of these organizations like the IETF, what ISOC does, what ICANN does, so that they can get involved and understand this. Then you can then confidently then say, really, the way we understand IG is different. I think I will come back if there are any questions that I have missed.
Yeah, just hold on. This time I want to give you 2 minutes.
No, I'm very short because Alice has covered most of the issues, so I'm not go over them. But this one of North Africa, I'm not really going to talk about the North Africa, but I wanted to take advantage of just that topic to mention here that at the moment I'm a member of the competition and choice and trust, the review team in ICANN, and one thing that we are really grappling with was that in the last round of GTLD applications, the ones from Africa were very, very few. I think there were 17, if I'm not wrong. 17, and of the ones that were approved and who signed the contract with ICANN, some have already dropped out. So there are just a few left. So this we can also maybe merge with the other issue of trying to increase this notion of internet governance to the rest of the society, particularly the business community. We need to involve the business community more in 2 areas. First of all, the policy formulation area, and then secondly, in the area of them knowing about the business opportunities that revolve around the internet. If they don't know about it, when we have these other rounds, you'll find that there are very, very few applications from Africa. So I could just mention that here so that we put it on record. Maybe the other one I can just add something on is this one of having IGF in schools. What I would suggest is that probably in school they could have a topic like public policy formulation, a general one, just to teach people how to participate in public policy formulation. As somebody mentioned here, I think it was President Aiga, the Constitution now has a requirement that public policy should be multi-stakeholder, everybody should be involved. So when they have a subject, maybe where they're learning about the Constitution, those subjects used to be there, I don't know, social studies or something, or civic studies. then they can have a subject or a topic there dealing with public policy formulation, and it's better to learn about overall public policy formulation, then you can apply it to something like internet governance. As Alice has said, internet governance is very hard to define. When we were in the working group on internet governance, we spent around 2 months arguing what is internet governance, and I don't think we really came up with a solution.
Okay, there was one more question, but I think Marlene wanted to ask about how do we get actionable decisions?
Yes, and in fact, an anecdote. There's a time, this is not the first time we've thought about introducing internet governance in schools. And I remember my former boss, Dr. Vitang, and them were asking me when we approached him, he said, well, what job will anyone get from learning internet governance? You know, so you get internet governance is really hard. Now the question around diversity is a very, very, very critical one. That I think that came from Maryland, and how we ensure that the IGF is not just a talk show. Having convened a global one in 2011 and chaired it myself, the global one in 2011, I think I can quite gladly say I reached the so-called proverbial IGF class ceiling, and I was disappointed. Because to me, the IGF actually still does feel like a talk show at the global level. And the reason why it feels like a talk show at the global level is because it's got no teeth. You cannot really come out with anything concrete from there, apart from perhaps lessons or sharing. And so for me, where the IGF makes the most sense and has the most impact is at the national and at the regional level. Because at the national level, we can discuss issues here that are important for Kenya and table them in front of the permanent secretary or the cabinet secretary and say, these are the issues we think are important. And you then, by extension, see those implemented. And I think we saw that with the multi-stakeholder model. And I think as we go forward, and this is something even the Internet Society is beginning to really reconsider, is how do we support the internet governance? And perhaps supporting it will make more sense at the national and regional level, because that is where you allow for diversity at the various levels. And then somebody mentioned multi-stakeholder and being equal. Being diverse, it doesn't really mean being equal, because when I look at the IGF, for example, and I think I've attended nearly all of them apart from last year's, when I look, for example, at the number of African governments that attend there, I can bet you. And again, back to you, the academics, you need to do this, to do an assessment. I can bet you more than 90% that most of the governments that go there do not go there out of their own budgets. It's because somebody has supported them, and because they want to provide this semblance of the IGF being this global open space. And I know that is criticism, and I'll probably be banned on the stage for it, but I believe so. And most of us, the youth who go to the IGF, and the next one is going to be Mexico in December, will probably go there because we had funding from HIBOS and all of these developing organizations, but not necessarily because we understand what it really means. So if you were to ask me, and I'm not young, I think I would invest more in areas that are really critical. Understanding how to develop protocol, business, how to provide angel investors who actually provide space for our young people to come up with businesses, so that they don't come out of college and the first thing they say is I want to work for Safaricom. I want people to come out of colleges and say I want to develop my own business that takes advantage of the internet as an infrastructure. Thank you.
Thank you. Eric, please, your final comments, because the MC has given me several warnings for time.
Well, since you give me several warnings, I'll keep my comment to the coffee time.
Okay, fine. That's okay. I think we can now thank the panelists for such a lively debate. Thank you.
Thank you all.